Just by a raise of hand, is anyone watching the recordings, or is my face eternally dubbed on YouTube for no good reason? Mai is honest, Inbal is trying to be a nice person. Thank you.
No, I actually missed one of the lessons, so I watched it on YouTube.
Okay. So today we're going to talk about summary speeches. And I think up until this point, you've realized that summaries is something that is quite interesting, is a little bit tricky. For at least half of my debating career, I summarized. And I think this is one of the most useful tools that you can have from debate. And a summary speech is basically a very clever way of being a biased judge. And just from what you heard up until this point, what do you know about summaries? What are summaries like? What they're supposed to do? What are their goals?
To compare yourself versus the opening government?
Okay, compare yourself to the opening. Yes. What else?
Talk about the main class in the debate.
Right. Someone listened to feedback. That's amazing. What else?
Explain why your side was better, not only from the other opposition government side, but in the same two teams.
Yeah, excellent. Any other people who would like to contribute to this so far really good chain of answers? The goals of summaries. What's meant to be happening in summaries? That's okay. If you don't have answers, it's perfectly fine, because this is the session where we talk about summaries. So are we ready for another pink presentation? Yes. Great success. Okay. So I sometimes go watch through your faces and I try to see whether you guys approve of my puns and my choices of pictures. And I don't care, but it's entertaining to me. So if you dislike something and you have a miserable face, it makes me happier. If you like something and you smile, it makes me happier. So there's really is a win-win situation. It all means that I make sure that my presentation has character. So let's talk a little bit about the goals of the summary, right? What are we meant to achieve there? So the first thing that we have to make sure is that we analytically summarize a debate. And the really key word here is analytically. This means that you don't just summarize and you retell the debate, but rather you present it in a manner that provides additional analysis. And we'll talk about what this actually means a little bit further down the line. Well, the next thing that you really want to do is really want to explain why your side wins the debate, one, and two, why your partner is really, really important. What is unique about debate is that you don't just have to prove what your side government or side opposition are the winning ones, right? As some of you have learned from second half, sometimes you have to win over opening half as well and explain why your partner is more important than opening government or opening opposition. And we do this by explaining what is unique, special, and important in my partner's speech. Finally, and I'd even say most importantly, is engaging and replying with previous speakers. More often than not, your partner is going to have an excellent speech, but this excellent speech won't be more excellent than the other speeches in the room. And really, it is the summary speaker's job to explain why the winning speech, their partner's speech, is one that is meant to win and engage, and how he engages, answers, and prioritizes itself over everything else that's happening in the room. So two things, and we'll talk about this. See, I put a cat. It has nothing to do with the topic. See, I let go of the puns. No puns this time, but there are cats. So appreciate the generic internet cats, okay? This one is looking at you, judging on the side of what you should not do. So every time you do bad things in debate, this cat is going to stare you down and explain to you with its eyes that you're doing a terrible job. So what should you not do on the cat side? First of all, you should not just retell the debate. If you have even a semi-decent judge, the semi-decent judge is going to know what happened in the debate. They're going to probably write notes about all the topics and all the arguments that have been said in the debate, and just resharing this information is not what you're meant to be doing. The other thing that you should never do as a summary speaker, you should not ever add new material and unexpected arguments. Why? It used to be in previous days that the summary speaker of side government could add some new material, while summary speaker of side opposition could add no new material. And the reason for that was that summary speaker of opposition could still engage and rebut closing government, whereas closing government really couldn't rebut the last speaker of closing opposition. And here's what. In debate, we judge based on fairness. And what we really want to do is make sure that all teams have an opportunity to engage with all positive material from all teams. As time progressed, people realized that the old metric was unfair to closing opposition, because closing government got 2 speakers that had new information, whereas closing opposition got only 1 speaker that adds new information. So as of today, for the past, I think 5 or so years, it's been the norm that in opening half, both speakers can add new information, whereas in closing half, only the member can add new information, whereas none of the summary speakers can add new information. Now, someone is going to raise their hand and ask, Varia, what is new information? We'll talk about this a little bit later, but just by a rule of thumb, new information is information that cannot be expected. Hence why I wrote unexpected arguments. What you are allowed to add is analysis, is a rebuttal, is examples, maybe in some cases add some additional analysis within a logical gap that was pointed out in your partner's speech. But if it's a completely new argument, then you probably can't really say it. And if you do say it, it's not going to be credited. So make sure that as a summary speaker, you don't add new or unexpected arguments. What should you do then on a positive side? First of all, you have to juxtapose arguments. Juxtaposition means the direct comparison and creating parallels. So for example, if we're talking about the debate about allowing or introducing capital punishment, side government might say that capital punishment is really something that some really bad people deserve. Opposition might say, on an unrelated note, that the state has no right to interfere in matters of life and death. If I'm a summary speaker, I'll take both of these arguments and I'll juxtapose them as a summary speaker, and I'll say, both of these arguments ask on a principle level whether life can be taken away from a human being. And then I'd explain why my side won this comparative. So first of all, you want to juxtapose arguments. Second of all, you want to explain why an argument is stronger than the other arguments made. So for example, I can say, while I agree that some people may deserve death, which is what side government told us, on side opposition, we think that the state is the wrong actor to really implement this, this practice. Because the state, like my partner explained, let's pretend I have a partner. Like my partner explained, the state was not the one who gave life to this individual. And the state is usually allowed to take only things that it has given us in the first place, right? Like it can take from us taxes because it allowed us to have a job. It can take, require people to serve in the military because it provides security. Whereas the right to life was not granted by the government. Therefore, it is not the one to take it away. And this is why this argument is stronger and more important than the other argument about this person deserving death. Thirdly, you really want to show a series of claims that win a clash. Sometimes you can have a very big clash. For example, whether the capital punishment is going to deter other criminals from committing serious crimes. And you can say, and you can restructure the speech and explain why all the reasons that your partner said, explain what this is going to cause deterrence. One, for example, your partner said, this is a very big punishment. Two, it harms or it really touches the person on its most basic level, and its most basic instinct to survive. So it also feels a lot more threatening. Three, there is a societal taboo around it. If you notice, all the examples I'm giving, I'm not retelling the entire argument, but rather putting all the arguments together, explaining why my partner said and showing why my partner's series of claims wins this specific practical clash of deterrence. Finally, two things to point out. Sometimes some people are going to say off-clash arguments. Like someone might say, I think capital punishment is amazing because it's going to give a lot of jobs to people who produce the poison given to inmates that are being executed. While relevant to the debate, I think most of you are going to agree that this argument is probably going to be mostly off clash in the debate about capital punishment. And then what you should probably say is explain why this argument is off clash and doesn't deserve to be part of the general discussion. Finally, you want to conclude the clashes from the arguments. You want to take a look at the arguments and from these arguments derive the clashes that have happened in the debate. We'll talk about the types of clashes a bit later, but sometimes debaters try to say, oh, I want this debate to go into this general direction and then mandate the clashes ahead of time. Whereas a good summary speaker looks at the debate very carefully and concludes from the arguments made the specific clashes within the debate. Cool? Are there questions about that? The things that you should and you shouldn't do. We'll talk about all of these things more in depth in a couple of minutes. Questions?
Varia, by summary speaker, do we also mean the second speaker in the opening side?
No, because the second speaker in the opening half may add new material.
Yeah, even the second speaker in the opening opposition?
Yes, of course, because opening government may engage with them through POIs through the entire debate. In fact, sometimes opening government may ask a POI to opening opposition while the POI is directed at second opposition. It's not a great strategy, but sometimes, let's say you have a very strong opening opposition and a very weak closing opposition, and you're going to ask closing opposition a POI that highlights why you think you win over opening opposition.
Sounds terribly sneaky.
Yes, very sneaky. Debate is a sneaky game.
Is that considered sportsman-like or like frowned upon?
It really depends on the situation in the room, but generally speaking, opening opposition can reply to you with a POI to closing government. The question really is, when would you reserve to this tactic? And probably in some very extreme cases when you think that bottom half is not your biggest threat. So I've been in these situations where at least two teams might be extremely irrelevant. Even if like I'm government and both oppositions are very irrelevant and they're saying nonsense, and then my POI is going to highlight why I'm more important than the team on my own half. So I might say, the most important point in this debate is na. And this is going to be my POI, where its sole point is to explain why I'm more important than my closing half, for example. Also sneaky, but it works. Cool. Other questions? Okay. We go back to talking about summary speakers. Okay. So now I have a different picture. It's a child speaking through a megaphone. I did not have pictures of cats that would highlight the font strongly enough. So we go back to generic debate pictures. Okay. So what is the essence of summary? What is actually being judged? So when a judge looks at your summary, what they basically do is they look at the content. And it really is a tricky situation because the judge is going to look at what you're saying, but you're not allowed to say anything new, right? And up until this point, if you listen to feedback from judges, you've probably noticed that what judges care about is the content of your speech. So what can the summary speaker do? 3 things. First of all, a summary speaker may give a new outlook, a new perspective, or worldview to a debate. So for example, we are talking about vaccination. Let's say we're having a debate about vaccinations from 2 years ago, prior to the coronavirus. And we're having this conversation, and my partner gave all of these reasons why the vaccine is important, also in times of crisis. And when a pandemic hits, this is going to be incredibly important. And when I look at the room, I understand that the thing that is most important or the most distinguished in my partner's speech is the pandemic aspect. So as a summary speaker, I can give a new perspective or a new outlook on the debate and say, listen, the most important way to look at this debate is not through everyday or regular normal human life, but rather the important point here, the important perspective is looking through a pandemic perspective. And this is the perspective that we really want to aim at when we discuss topics such as vaccinations, because this is where the arguments really become important. So as a summary speaker, while this might not have been the most important bit in my partner's speech, I really reshape the way that the judge should look at the debate, and I give them a different kind of glasses. And even though this is not necessarily a new material, it does give a different outlook and gives a new importance to my partner's speech. The second thing that is a summary speaker can do is that they can add additional rebuttals. What does this mean? When I don't summarize, I'm going to be very frank, I usually say a lot of things very quickly. And when I extend, I have a lot of material. This usually means that I leave most of the engagement and most of the direct rebuttals to my summary speaker. The summary speaker can't add new material. So all the material goes to the extension speaker, to the member, whereas the summary speaker is going to be the one that gives most of the rebuttals, or the rebuttals that are essential but don't necessarily have to come within the speech of the previous speaker. The third thing that a summary speaker can do is rebuild argumentation. So more often than not, your extension speaker or your member of the government or opposition is given their speech. And what happens is after your member comes up another person from the opposing side and rebuts every single argument that your partner made. And what you can do as a summary speaker really is you can rebuild the argumentation. You can either add new examples, you can add bits and pieces of analysis. So someone says, oh, Varia's partner asserted that they just asserted that capital punishment is going to create deterrence, and they didn't really explain why. And I, as a summary speaker, can say, but of course my partner explained. They gave you this example. They gave you the example of of really high taxes or really high fines in the United States on people who avoid taxes for tax avoidance. This means that even if the fine or the punishment isn't that is not that common or isn't often executed, but it is very severe and very extreme, that still means that people are going to be deterred, and that means that the higher the punishment, the likelier the deterrence. So all of this bit of explaining the example and adding bits of analysis that really explain my partner's speech counts as rebuilding. Now notice there is a fine line between new material and rebuilding, and it's sometimes a little bit hard to walk, and it sometimes might take practice, but good summary speakers really know how to rebuild rather than add new information, and all of their speeches might count as part of fair game and not as just new information that's being spitted out into the open. So questions on that slide?
Explaining an assertion, that's new information, assuming it wasn't, no examples were given.
Oh, if it's just explain assertion as new information. The question is, and the real keyword here is expected. Is the analysis you're providing expected or is it not? If you think that it's fair game for the other side for the other side to expect this bit of analysis, then it's not new information. But if the other side did not expect this analysis, or the analysis is somewhat new, then no, it's going to be counted as new material and you're not going to be credited with it.
Can you add examples to enhance one of the arguments, or examples are also kind of new information?
So examples are fine. Examples are really, really fine if the analysis is there. So if I'm a summary speaker, I might POI someone because POIs really are a part of your speech. I might POI someone and say, did you know, let's say this debate is about the invasion of, let's say, trying to find, I have the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict, and all of my examples are very militaristic. So this is what we're going to go with. We're going to have a militaristic example. Let's say we were arguing about whether boots on the ground is a good strategy to create peace in Syria. Okay. And let's say my partner explained that putting boots in the American, let's say, or Western boots on the ground in Syria is going to create a whole lot of more mess because there's going to be more parties, more Syrians are going to be affiliated with other parties, there's going to be more fractions are going to fight with one another, and that is going to escalate the conflict. Cool. So, and then the other side might say, oh, so they have this analysis, but they have no example that can prove this point, right? So I, as a summary speaker, can give an example of Russia and American intervention in Afghanistan in the 70s, and said that the more troops were there and the more different affiliations were there, the more fractions happened within the Afghani community, and that created more in-Afghani wars that are reflected up until today and resulted in second American intervention during the second Bush administration, right? So this is an example that I feel like it's mostly common knowledge, and it explains and it pre-existed analysis, and it shows why, and it really directly answers a rebuttal. So you'd say, oh, they really should have expected this example on the one hand, and on the other hand, it shows why this analysis can be true in the real world. Yeah, cool. Also read about conflicts. It's a lot of fun. It's my hobby. It's great. Turkey is amazing on the global stage at the moment. I highly recommend you watch for Turkey. They, yeah. Cool. So when we talk about summaries, we usually think about three types of summaries. First of all, and the first summary that the people in this room have done is a summary by speakers. And I wrote a big no. The first summary ever that you made probably, or some of you guys made, have sounded like Prime Minister said X, but then a leader of opposition said Y. So second speaker of the government said Z, and just go from one speaker to another. And it really is a waste of time and energy. Thankfully, none of you do this anymore, so it's irrelevant. The other type of summary is by teams. And I wrote there a small no, because it's not that big of a problem as going by speakers, But it's not very efficient, because more often than not, what happens is that you end up repeating arguments, because what usually happens in debate is that second half has a similar argument to opening half. However, what it does is it deepens the argument as opposed to giving new argumentation. So if you summarize by themes, you are likely to make the mistake of, first of all, answering the weak version of the argument and then answering the strong version of the argument. Now, there is no fault within of itself, other than it just wastes time, and time really is valuable in debate, and we try not to do that, and also creates a rather messy summary. So the third and preferred method of summarizing is summarizing by themes. So some of these themes you guys are already familiar with, right? So you can talk about like just generic themes like problem, justification, effectiveness, you know, and all of those things that we talked about, just like the burdens of proof in every debate, and you can just summarize according to that. Usually you don't have more than 3 clashes. In most cases, it's best to summarize according to 2, and everything else to push into the rebuttal. But basically, you can just look at that from a very generic standpoint. The other way of summarizing is looking at the main questions in the debate, like topics, the general topics. So we talked about the topics of deterrence, we talked about the topic of justice, and we're going to summarize according to these topics. The other way, for example, to summarize is by summarizing circles of influence. So how does, like, let's say capital punishment, how does it affect the prisoner or the criminal? How does it affect the victim? How does it affect society, right? These are circles of influence that goes from a smaller, tighter circle, just sort of goes wider. And notice that the circles of influence really is a great strategy, not to only find arguments, but also to summarize debates, right? If we go back to the motion about banning motorcycles, you guys remember this example? It's a terrible motion. Yes, I can see your faces. All of you are already bored and rubbing your eyes. So some of you feel very guilty. All right. So if we look at the things at the debate from circles of influence, you can talk how the debate influences and summarize the motorcycle driver, how it affects the bystanders, like the people who walk, and the passerbys and the other drivers, and then there's general safety on the roads, right? Circles of influence is a really useful tool in this setting. It suffers from the problem of being rather generic, right? And we'll talk about the issues of generic things a little bit later. But finally, we can talk about clashes, right? The big questions, or the points where the debate really, where do the sides not agree very significantly in these debates? And you have to really listen to the debate to decide which of the themes, or which of the themes is preferred for your specific debate. The more precise title of a clash you choose, or a topic or a theme, the more credit you're going to get, because it means that you're going to be more efficient with your time, and you're going to have more information packed that is relevant for determining the outcome of the debate. Because what the judge really looks for in a debate is not just a nice speech. I think all of you have realized this by now, that this is not just talking to, not just public speaking practice. What we really want to make sure is that every word that we say in a debate is utilized in such a way that the debate is weighed in our favor. So what you want to make sure is that all of your clashes, all of your themes and topics are chosen in such a manner that they weigh and allow the judge to believe that you are the one winning. So if we go back to the example of capital punishment, I can just give the general theme of there's the justification clash, whether we're allowed to execute people, and then there's a practical effectiveness clash of how is this going to affect society. Or I can listen to the debate more carefully and say, the first question is the legitimacy of governmental intervention in human life, right? Which becomes so much more specific. And then everything I explain under this topic becomes so much more clear. And the level of of violence or perception of the judicial system or effects on the victim or the principle of justice. So the more concrete words you use, the more credit you're going to get, and also the more likely your speech to be better structured and more clear. Are there questions about the types of summaries? You either understand nothing or everything is very clear. And in the first case, I'm worried. In the second case, I'm also worried that you're wasting your time. So,
I have a question. Like
yes.
it's more of a itbachenut. It just sounds like impossible. Like
Okay.
you're supposed to do all of it like during the debate because you can't prepare beforehand. And so like, yeah.
So we'll talk about the practice very soon, right? But I think this is a very good comment, mostly because it's very easily dealt. Now put your mind at ease, allow me. So first of all, when you look at a motion and the more motions you're going to debate, the easier it's going to become. You're going to be able to foresee ahead of time the likely clashes that are going to happen within the debate. And when we finish our debate sessions, the ones of you who will decide to be summary speakers, and if there were any second or third year speakers with us in this class, they will tell you that at some point I'm going to tell you what position you should practice more and what position you should take. Because some jobs are more intuitive to some people. And there's ways to practice to foresee ahead of time the clashes within an emotion. This is first of all. Second of all, over time, you learn to listen and to develop arguments as you go. And the good summary speaker, when I summarize, even when I extend as well, I don't write anything during the first two speeches of the debate. I just don't. I listen to the arguments being made and I derive either my arguments if I'm extending or my clashes from the first two speakers. I have my clashes by the middle of the first speaker of opposition. So opening government, so I had heard 7 minutes of prime minister, 3.5 minutes of leader of opposition. And by then, I usually have a pretty good idea of what direction the debate is going. Because at this point, I have already heard a POI from closing opposition. I have already heard a POI from closing government to opening opposition. I've heard the general case of opening opposition as well. And opening government have already laid out their cards on the table. I know where this debate is likely to be going. And this is how I can choose the arguments that are going to be A, relevant to the debate, and B, clashes that are going to be helpful in summarizing this the whole conversation, especially if I know, if I'm summarizing, what my partner is likely to bring to the table. So first of all, you can foresee clashes, and second of all, you learn to listen and to derive them from the debate. It does take time and it takes practice, but I can assure you that it's doable. If you'd like, if any of you would like some exercises, I can give you exercises for summarizing. Some of them include watching debates and then finding ways to summarize them, and then listening to the way the winning team chose to summarize their debate. But if you'd like to do anything like that, it's a lot of fun, somewhat time consuming. So let me know. I can link you to cool debates on YouTube. Some of them are more clear than others. Some of them are more fun than others. You can do it. Shirley, is this helpful? It's just like, yeah. Okay. All right. So let's go back to our sheep. So we're slowly getting to the end here, but there really is a question of strategy. How would you strategize about your summary speech? So first of all, you really want to make sure that you choose a summary that will benefit your case and highlight the importance of your partner. So if your partner, for example, talked mostly about the sociological and societal effects of capital punishment, you want to make sure that your summary speech themes reflect this idea, right? If, for example, your partner talked mostly or only about the perception of the judicial system, then you would really choose topics like perception of the system and justice, and not have a whole clash about arguments that your partner did not talk about. And you would deal with those in an extraneous rebuttal. Second of all, you want to make sure that you analyze the specifics of the debate. So we talked a little bit about choosing specific terms for clashes, but really it's about making sure that you don't overanalyze things that aren't important. We started by saying that what you really want to do is make sure that you don't just repeat arguments that were said, but rather you use your time effectively and strategically. So what you really want to make sure is you don't attack specific examples, right? You don't attack jokes. Sometimes, at least for me, I'm speaking from experience, sometimes it's very easy for me to really hold on to a very dumb argument and just make fun of the argument and of the idea behind it, and not do a lot of strategic work, making sure that the basic assumption of the case have been dealt with. Thirdly, you want to make sure that if you're a summary speaker, especially from closing opposition, that you don't use the exact same themes as the other teams, right? You want to have a personal perspective and a personal spin for the judge. Otherwise, if you don't do this, it just sounds like you're you're rehashing arguments that have already been made. So good judges are going to be able to notice everything you said, even if you use the exact same topics as the other teams. And sometimes they are the only correct topics in the debate, and that's fine. But if you really want to be noticed and you want to be distinguished from the rest of the speakers, make sure that you summarize your partner according to different themes to what has happened within the debate. Finally, sometimes speakers say, if I don't deal with this one very strong argument, the judge won't notice, and it's going to be okay. And thing is, if you ignore arguments, especially strong arguments, you're going to be fined for it, and you're not going to win over the strong argument just because you ignored it. Now, I will say that there is a conversation happening about the judging in the world, whether you're meant to answer every single argument from the other side, or whether you should just answer the strongest arguments from the other side. And I will say that personally, if someone makes a very stupid argument, like the earth is flat, I hope everyone agrees with me that this is a stupid argument. About 10 years ago, this was not a discussion I could have, like everyone agreed with me, and now I really have to preface it, make sure that everyone is on board with science now. So I don't think you need to rebut earth is flat arguments, but any argument that might hold any merit in the debate should probably be addressed, or at least explain why it's less important than the things that you do end up proving. Finally, what is the technique? Now notice how the color nicely fades into the orange. Yeah.
A quick question about the previous slide before.
Yeah, I was talking about the color orange. Yes.
So about the color orange,
I'm just gonna go back to the slide.
If for example, my partner presented the case of my partner present a different clash than the one that the opening, I don't know, opposition, the other one talked about. Should I explain why our clash is more important? Should I not ignore, but
wait? First of all, excellent question. 3 things that you really have to make sure. If your partner speaks about a completely different clash, there are the rules of engagement and debate. You want to make sure that opening half had an opportunity to engage with this completely new and out of this world clash. So make sure, and this is one very important, that you POI opening half with the material of this new clash, okay? Secondly, make sure that, I mean, all of this assuming this is a good clash and you didn't just make up something that is irrelevant, right? Right. Second of all, when you summarize, you make this a separate clash and you really invest time into explaining why it's a separate clash and why it's relevant to the debate, because sometimes your speaker might have made the clash, but they didn't explain why it's relevant, and it feels like a bubble within the room, okay? Depends on your speaker, right, on your partner. Thirdly, make sure that you weigh this clash against all other clashes. So you say, we are the only team to talk about this. Therefore, and we've given chances to engage. Sometimes you really have to go into meta debate. You say, I have asked opening half about this topic. This is the, assumingly, not sufficient reply that we've gotten. And this is why this analysis we've provided is so significant that it wins the entire debate. This often happens with international relations debates because you have so many actors, so it's very easy to open a different clash. So let's go back to Israel attacking in Syria. So let's say opening half talks about, opening government says, oh, this is in Israel interests because it protects Israel interests by making sure that ISIS doesn't take over Syria, right? Opening opposition say, no, this is terrible because there's going to be war. And also Iran is going to be engaged. So Iran is going to be at war with Israel. And then the second government comes up and says, well, what we really want is we want to secure more support. At this point, Turkey and Russia are struggling in Syria. And if Israel intervenes, then Israel is going to secure better relations with Russia and Turkey. Let's say, I don't really think this is a true argument, but let's say this is what your partner makes. I think it's actually the other way around. If Israel intervenes in Syria, we're going to have a terrible time with Russia and Turkey. But let's say that we made this argument. Let's say if you manage to prove it within the context of the debate. If you're a summary speaker, and let's say you POI'd about this opening half, you go, so there's the first question about the interests of Israel and how this is going to affect Israel, Syria, Iran relations. But the other bigger question that we have is Israel, Russia, Turkey relations. And my partner, Drol, was the only one who talked about this. And these are all the things that Drol said, and he talked about the economic aspects and about the security aspect and about the aspect of trading war and military facilities and information and the international stage arena that now Russia is going to vote in favor of Israel in the UN, as if, right? So, and this is the bigger clash. Why? Because it doesn't affect just short term until ISIS is defeated, but rather it affects long-term relations. Let's say, did you hear the cat? It was a cat. Yes. It's deaf, it can't hear me, but it meows very loudly. So you can say, first of all, it affects a longer period of time. And second of all, it affects more stages or more areas, right? We talked about security, we talked about economics, we talked about international relations. And this is why this is a much bigger clash to win. So even if we go to some war with Syria and maybe Iran, we have Turkey and Russia on our side that are so much bigger and stronger than Iran. And therefore this clash wins the debate, right? Cool.
I
Yes.
lost you. How is this a POI?
No, can you repeat the question?
You said something about the summary speaker POIing, but also referring to his previous speaker, and I lost.
So it's not necessarily the summary speaker, but let's say closing government in this pretend scenario where this pretend case is true in any way, shape, or form. You raise your hand because in real debate, you raise your hand and you go to, let's say, to opening opposition. You guys keep talking about Israel, Syria, and Iran relations. What do you guys think the effects are going to be on the Russia-Turkey relations when Russia and Turkey are in Syria this very moment, right? So you have given the information to opening half that you're going to introduce new actors to the debate, right? And that means that they have had an opportunity to engage with you. And also they're going to POI you when you're speaking. So have chances to engage. And also it's kind of their dumb, fault that they didn't think that Russia or Turkey are relevant when we talk about Syria, right? They really should read more newspapers. and rebut our stupid case.
So we want that? We want to show a hand to opening side?
We want to make sure that it's like a sneaky situation where you want to make sure that they know enough of your case for them to have an opportunity to engage, but not enough of our case for them to be able to rebut it completely. So it's like it's a game of how much you can show or how much you can really expose of your case. But basically, it is a gentleman's game, and we do want a fair chance of engagement, because the judge might consider that you didn't open half did not have a chance to engage with your case. Therefore, you can't win them because it didn't get a chance to explain why you're wrong. And even though you have a brilliant case, you're going to lose regardless.
But if I, raise my hand to do it POI and they don't accept that, so screw them.
Then that's their problem. Yes, they have to. Yes, absolutely. Yeah. And what you do in debate in Zoom, it's very easy. You make a face at the judge. So the judge notices that they didn't accept your POI. On Zoom, it's very easy. In the real world, the judge usually sits behind you. So you wait, I'm gonna show you. So you go, so you turn back to the judge and you sign that you weren't allowed to POI. So there's like a bit of a dramatic effect. Well, as the whole purpose is to make sure that the rules of fairness weren't upheld, and you gave the other side an opportunity to engage with your case, and you weren't given the opportunity. So if they don't engage with your case, it's their fault and not yours.
About that, so better to do POI for the second speaker, for them to have less time to rebut or something, or?
Oh, so we'll talk about, there's going to be a session about POIs, but basically the first speaker of opening government wants to take a POI from closing opposition, and the first speaker of opening opposition wants to take a POI from closing government, and then the second speaker of opening government wants to take a POI from opening opposition. That's usually the case. It's not set in stone. You don't get less points because you didn't do this. This is the convention.
If I had a POI if I'm closing government and I had a POI for the opening opposition, can the opening government steal my argument?
Absolutely is the answer. Absolutely. And this is why you want to make sure that you have a very creative extension. And if you're opening government or opening opposition, try to steal the extensions of the second half. Sneaky game. I like that word. We're going to use it a lot.
But you totally, it's obvious that they stole it. It's obvious that it's not an original idea.
So you want to make sure a second half that you have enough original ideas that for the opening half to not be able to steal enough of your material. Any good motion, any motion that's given in the competition or at our club, usually means that there's 5 winning arguments for each side. This is the generic criteria, the generic criterion for a good debate motion. So even if they stole an argument, and even if they were really, really amazing and made 3 or 4 arguments, you're more than likely to still have at least 1 argument. And it's unlikely that they explained all of the 4 arguments in depth enough. So either they explained 5 arguments, but they asserted a lot of things, so you can just take an argument and explain it more in depth, or you can just say another new argument. That's basically the gist. Okay, I have more slides and we're running out of time. So we're gonna run through the slides and that's it. Yes, GT. Not happy in a cage. Okay, so when we talk about the technique, going back to the color orange, right? What do we do as a summary speaker? During preparation time, we help our partner think about extensions. We want to make sure that our partner has as many things on their paper as they possibly can. Second of all, during the debate, we listen, we write, and we prioritize information. So we go, oh, this is an important bit. I'm going to write this down. This is unimportant. This goes into the rebuttal. This goes into the clashes. Thirdly, you want to make sure that you write a meaningful framing, that you're framing your first sentence in the debate really should explain to the judge why you win. Thirdly, you want to make sure that you allocate time strategically. Like I answered Drol's question, you want to make sure that the most important clash, or the clash that you think your partner wins the most, is the clash that you allocate the time most to. Finally, you want to explain the biggest questions that will determine the outcome of the debate. You want to make sure that you have not missed any information that is going to be helpful in winning the debate, and you want to make sure that your partner is relevant to all of those questions. Cat, your spine is broken. You can't leave the cage. It's quiet. It's also deaf. Cat! Breaks my heart. Okay. This is a cat. Look, it's a cute cat. Okay, so how do we construct a theme, right? So usually in the summary speech, you're going to have top three themes. And the way you want to structure your theme is by going like this. First of all, I want to present OG case very briefly, no more than 30 seconds, because OG's case, a good OG's case, would really set the tone to what everything that has been said in the theme, what it's like. Second of all, you want to give a very brief explanation of what government, let's say, this is an explanation from closing opposition, right? If you're closing government, you flip all of these things, right? So, and then what you want to make sure is you go through the government and opening opposition's cases and explain why OO's case does not sufficiently answer Gov's case. So for example, let's say that we talk about the capital punishment. And I can say, listen, guys, opening government said that there's a very big problem. Let's say the topic is the principle, the justification argument. Opening government said that some people really deserve to die for their horrendous crimes. Opening opposition replies to this by saying that, well, sometimes it's very difficult to determine justice with our human tools. Justice is subjective, and capital punishment is too extreme of a measure to deal or to execute such a big crime, such a big punishment. I think that while OO do a good job of replying to opening government's case, they don't necessarily deal in depth with why should not the government ever deal with this, and why should objective justice arise should the government not execute the criminal. My partner is the only one who has given you a categorical explanation of why under no circumstances should the state or the government be allowed to intervene with human life. My partner has historically been either Monica or Jonathan or Daniel or Sivan. But let's say Monica has explained to you why on the principle basis, the government should never take a human life away. And she gave you principle and practical justification to this. First of all, she explained to you that the government was not the one to give life to this individual. Therefore, it cannot intervene or take life from this individual. Second of all, Monica explained to you the governments are a terrible, terrible actor for this thing to do, because governments make mistakes. And every once in a while, someone who was meant to be executed is found to be completely innocent. This means that we should not, on a principle basis, ever try to execute criminals as state, right? So you really want to respond to rebuttals to accusations from the other side. You want to rebuild weak arguments of your own speaker and explain why the case was meaningful to the clash. So very quickly, the structure, you briefly talk about opening government's case, then you talk about how the other teams try to deal with this clash, explain why they're inadequate, and then explain why what your partner said is meaningful to the clash. Notice that at no point do you add new information, but rather you play a biased judge. You explain, this is how I would judge the debate, and I'm of course correct. Cool?
This is the order you recommend to build your argument, or just like the theme?
Can you repeat the question?
If this is the order it's best to talk.
It's a suggested order of a theme, and you should probably have 2 themes in a speech, in a summary speech. And it's a recommendation. You can do different things with your speech. You should find your own way. This is what I usually find works for most people, and it's a good place to start. Cool. Other questions? No? Lovely. So I think we'll take 5 minutes break, and then we'll get back here for allocations. How does that sound?
Sounds great, Varia.
Hi, Navot. Okay, so 5 minutes break.
תסתכלי בוואטסאפ.
Okay. Navot, can you stop the recording?